Hey guys, this is Kara here. In this video, I want to talk about how to properly give a self-introduction in interviews. And the reason why I want to talk about this is because this question, tell me about yourself, is such important. It sets the tone for most interviews. And a lot of people are not giving their answer properly. And before we get into it, I want to mention in this channel, I make a lot of English content that's related to interviews, career, as well as communication. So if you're interested in these type of contents and topics, make sure you follow me for more. And let's just dive in. So think from an interviewer's perspective, it's pretty much like resume screening, where if it's manual, they spend like 10-15 minutes on each single resume, and for each opening or titles, they're looking for specific things in the form of keywords. And if after those 10 seconds, they still haven't found those keywords, they move on to the next. And I think it's the same with self-introduction. There's certain things that they look for in a candidate, whether it's clear outline in a job description, where there's like some hidden criteria that's in the hiring manager's mind, right? They're looking for those things. And then if halfway through, they still haven't heard any of those things, they probably make up the decision on the spot that they're not gonna hire you. So your goal is really to hit those things. So for common self-intro, that's like 3 to 4 minutes. The interviewer's attention is pretty much like a U shape, where you have the highest attention when you first open, when you first started, and then in the middle, you kind of lose part of their attention. They probably be looking at your resume, they're probably taking some notes or think about, something else. And then at the end, they also expect you to finish, you get their attention back. So the way you deliver should really be structured in a way that caters to this. For example, when you're opening, you wanna make sure you highlight your most valuable stuff, what's the most important, what's the most relevant, what they care about the most. And then midway through, it is inevitable that you're losing part of their attention, but you wanna guide their attention to focus on what you want them to focus on, I guess in a subtle way. And then lastly, when you're finishing, you wanna end the answer in a way that's conducive to the follow-up conversations. Like, you don't want them to ask you some, overly aggressive or defensive questions. And in this video, I'm sharing a lot of details and mistakes people make, so make sure you watch to the end. And first of all, I want to talk about how to highlight your value. So I think a common mistake people make when they're doing their intro is that they kind of focus too much on their titles, their company, their industry. It's like they're just name dropping. It's like I work at this company at this role, and then I move on to the next. But then in reality, reading those broad terms out, or like name dropping, is not really helping you, because they can literally get those information from your resume. And I think what's better instead is to elaborate on what specifically you did. It's like what you've been doing on a daily basis, what have you achieved, what are you best at, what do you specialize in, and what do people know you about. I think it's a lot about personal branding. And then when it comes to the middle part, I think there are two common paradigms people fall into. So one is like they get extremely boring. They'd be like, I work at company A and I was on this role, and then next I move on to the company B, I was on this other role, and then 3 years later, currently I'm at company C, which is just so boring. I don't think anyone can keep their attention if you're talking this way. And then the other one is like they start rambling, they start free flowing, and they start giving a lot of unnecessary, irrelevant information. They start to be like, okay, so I was at this company A. When I joined, this company was like this, and the team was like this, and there were these kind of problems. And what I was doing there was I learned a lot. I was reaching out to people and be like, I finally achieved this and that. And I'm not saying that way to answer a question is bad in general. It could be good when you're getting into like a chatting mode with the interviewer. But then I don't think it's ideal in the introduction. You want to stay high level while highlighting what you did there. What I recommend here for this middle part is that you use this PST structure. Basically, P stands for the position, which is what you did there. You give a high-level intro, and then S stands for success/strength, which is something you're good at, something you specialize in, something you achieved in this certain position or a certain time during the time you were at the company. And then lastly, the T means transition. So you talk about how your role or how your interests evolve over time, how they develop, how they change. You can talk about things like over time you start taking on more responsibilities, how the company started doing different stuff. So you're focusing on a different sector and your responsibility change over time, or like things like promotions, etc., etc. So that can make your answer more structured and easier to follow. And then let's move on to how you end the self-introduction. I know many people struggle with this. They kind of just like, so that's my introduction, or be like, yeah, so that's my experience, or that's what I've been doing so far. It feels like they're ending at a weird or awkward spot in the middle of something. So something I would do instead is that I always talk about what I wanted to do next, right? So ideally, I want to make sure it's congruent with what I mentioned earlier in the middle part, which is basically my career trajectory and every single transition I made. And it has to make sense with pretty much all my career decision making. Because like I mentioned earlier, you want to make the way you end conducive to the following conversation to make it easier. So for example, say in the middle part, I was saying, here are the things I'm good at. These are my skills. These are the things I did in the past. And then when I'm trying to end this intro, I'll probably be like, hey, so this is how I am gonna apply these skills to this position, or like how this is what I'm good at. How is this relevant to what your team is doing? How is it relevant with me creating value for your team? And then finally, I want to talk about this debate people always have, is that whether you should talk about your most recent experience versus you should follow a chronological order. Like things you talk about first should be things that happened first. And I think the principle I mentioned earlier perfectly answers this question, is that you want to talk about the most valuable stuff when you're opening. Let's just say you're recruiting for a company and this company thinks it's a great deal where people graduated from. It's like they think really highly of the prestige schools. Then, if you're someone from Harvard, from Stanford, MIT, you probably want to go for that, right? Like you talk about your school first, you start from the school, and then you move on to your most recent stuff. But then I think for many people who's been working for a few years, the things you've been doing, like your past experiences, are probably the most valuable stuff. They're the probably most relevant stuff. If this is the case, I would recommend to start from the most recent experience, and then you go back to what you study in school, what degree you got, etc., etc. So I think the single biggest mistake people make is that they're spending time on something that's less relevant, less important, where something that the interviewer doesn't even care, when they're having most of their attention when they're opening, simply because they're so obsessed with following a certain time order. Like that doesn't make sense. So that's about what I want to share in this video. I would say that's pretty sufficient for you to develop a good answer for the tell me about yourself question. Especially if this is the question you've been struggling for a while, I would say give it a try. But obviously there's more details to the self-introduction, especially when it comes to personal case, which I cannot cover in one single video. But if you find this helpful, please drop a like. And if you have any questions or thoughts, consider leaving a comment, because I read every single comment. And follow me if you're interested in more similar content. And if you're interested in working with me or other services, my DM is open. And I'll see you guys in the next.